Philip asks, wouldn't the real issue with these sensitive areas, prohibited areas, carry limitations be in the aftermath of a self-defense event? So you have to defend yourself, and the DA tracks your movements through prohibited areas to establish you were breaking the law. One thought, there are some states that do condition self-defense on not being engaged in unlawful activity. So if you end up having to go to the gun and you're in a place you're not supposed to have the gun, they could argue that's unlawful activity and you don't have a privilege to act in self-defense when you otherwise would have had that privilege, absent the prohibited space issue. As far as tracking your movements, we've certainly seen from the January 6th protests that when the government wants to track your movements, suddenly they're able to track your movements, and we're all walking around with the smartphones, right?
Yeah, it will independently, being in a sensitive place with a firearm, even with a CCW permit under SB2, will be its own violation of the penal code. How that interacts with self-defense, I'm not sure. That's your area of expertise, and we do have, one of my colleagues does do that sort of work for us. But even if the self-defense is still lawful, you're still going to be charged with that penal code violation, unless the DA doesn't, of course. But here in California and a lot of states similar to California, they try and put you in jail even if you've done everything right, so they'll put you through the ringer, as you're well aware, Andrew. So I imagine this will only make it worse. And it's not just, yes, typically that is a common situation where someone will get caught. They have to defend themselves, and then it turns out they had a gun. But it could also be as simple as you're in a grocery store that didn't have one of the guns allowed signs. You accidentally print a little. Some Karen, as you put it, calls the police. You're in trouble. Like, you just broke the law. And even if the DA lets you off, you're never getting a carry permit again. Your constitutional right's gone, because in California, a lot of sheriff's departments in the cities, not so much the rural areas, but in the cities, if you've ever been arrested before, even without charges, even without a conviction, they're denying people right now. That's probably a future case we'll have to deal with at some point, because they're finding any excuse to deny people now, even without charges. The Attorney General Bonta, put this in a letter advising the sheriffs after Bruin that an arrest could be grounds for denying a permit, even without a criminal conviction afterwards. So it's gotten very absurd out here. They clearly are trying to stop us in any way they can.
Yeah, I lived for 25 years in Massachusetts, and the gun regime there is very similar. So we have an odd system where your concealed carry permit, believe it or not, Massachusetts, even 25, 30 years ago, allowed for concealed carry permits, believe it or not. And they were issued by your local police chief. Every little city and town has its own little police department. Might be 3 officers, but they have their own police department.
Yep.
And so it was issued by your local police chief rather than on the county or the state level. So whether or not you got a permit tended to be a function of how close you live to Boston. The further you got away from Boston, the more comfortable the police chief.
It sounds very much so. So California has a similar system where it was funny last year, actually, because Bonta and Newsom all panicked because of Bruin, but it really just demonstrates how little they know their own state, because while San Francisco, to a lesser extent LA, the Bay Area cities don't issue permits, most of California does. I think California has 50-something counties, and like 35 or 40 of them did issue on a shall issue basis. Although it was a may issue state, all these rural sheriffs pretty much said, yeah, if you have a clean record, we're going to give, and you say you want it for self-defense, we're going to get you a permit. So hundreds of thousands of Californians were carrying. And remember, if you live in, say, some middle of nowhere county, if you're out in Bakersfield and you get a permit, that permit works throughout the state. So you can go on a trip to San Francisco, you're carrying legally, even though nobody who lives in that city could get a permit because they never issued to anyone. After Bruin, I think the sheriff of San Francisco bragged that he hadn't issued a permit in 2 years. So it was funny because they didn't seem to realize their own system. They all said, this is going to lead to all this crime and this and that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? These people have been carrying for years, and you can't point to a single example of someone with a permit causing a crime. I mean, I'm sure an example exists. There are outliers, but it is incredibly rare for someone who goes through especially the California process of getting a CCW permit, which is costly, takes many months. You have to do a training course. In a few cases, you have to do a psych exam at the discretion of the issuing authority. So these aren't people who are going to cause crime. If you're going to do all of that, you're not going to do all that and then you go knock off a liquor store. It's ridiculous. So it's funny how little they know about their own state is what I'd say to that.
I mean, it seems like there would be equal protection issues here. I mean, just because you happen to live in one county or another, or one town or another, you can exercise an enumerated constitutional right, or you can't.
Yeah,
It seems insane.
yeah.